Penn State, best and worst. Next on Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. All right, we're talking Penn State football. We got Tim Aiden on the line from SB Nation's Black Shoe Diaries as we bring him on a regular basis to talk up the Nittany Lions, and we get a little historic and a little bit perspective from the archives as we look at the best wins in Penn State football history, at least from a certain time reference. Most of the bloggers that come on here, we discuss in terms of their frame of reference. So, Tim, I will cut you loose in regards to not asking you to go back into the 1920s, but in regards to your frame of reference of watching and covering Penn State football. And best wins doesn't necessarily have to be an objective measure of they produced a Big Ten championship or a Rose Bowl or something like that, but it could be certainly something personal to you that it just means something more to you. So whatever your criteria, best wins. And of course, we invite everyone to leave your comments down in the section below to compare your memories of Penn State football.
I guess before we start, my frame of reference. So I was born in 1984, and I started following Penn State football when I was about 7 years old. So we're talking early 90s. You know what? I'll start with the rough part first and then go to the good part. So I'll start with the most excruciating losses. And this one's pretty recent. It'd be a 2017 game at Ohio State. I can just remember I was at a Penn State bar in the DC area where I live, and I just remember we got off Saquon Barkley taking an opening kickoff for the touchdown. Everyone's cheering. The drinks are flowing. We jump out to like a 21-3 lead. Things are looking great. I mean, Ohio State did kind of come back a bit towards halftime, but then second half, we're still able to put points on the board. But then Ryan Bates, probably our best O lineman, then goes down with an injury. He's out for the game. Ryan Buckholz, one of our best D linemen, goes down, and things just slowly seem to come apart. We missed a chance. I remember we're up like 15 early fourth quarter. We forced a fumble at midfield. Penn State forced a fumble at midfield, and it seemed like there was an opportunity to maybe go for a kill shot with a deep ball, but instead I think they opted to just try to run with Saquon. He got stuck for a loss, and they ended up going 3 and out and punting. And on that punt, it got blocked, and you could just kind of sense momentum was shifting after that play. So Ohio State, sure enough, scored a touchdown, cut it to an 8-point game. Penn State did march back and kick a field goal, but they got down into I think inside the 10-yard line and couldn't punch it in. So if they had been able to score a touchdown there, maybe it would have been just enough to stave off J.T. Barrett and his video game-like performance in the fourth quarter to be that Ohio State comeback. But I just remember leaving that bar just feeling absolutely crushed. Because it seemed like just an hour or so ago, we're all thinking, man, this is happening. We're gonna beat Urban Meyer at home and his in Columbus, and and march on towards a playoff bid. So and then it came crashing down in the fourth quarter, especially, and then the following week, the team just seemed a little hungover from that loss, and lost to Michigan State on the last second field goal in those monsoon-like conditions, and the rest is history. So I'd say that's my most excruciating loss. Other honorable mentions: the 1999 Minnesota game. This was Penn State was number 2 in the country. They had played some pretty tight games before that. They needed a last-minute touchdown to beat Miami on the road. They needed a last-minute stand defensively to avoid being upset by Drew Brees and Purdue. But the defense always found a way to come through and hang on at the end. But in this game, Minnesota, it was a homecoming game. I think it was a noon game, homecoming. Just kind of one of those sleepy noon games where Minnesota, they were like feisty up and comer, but you felt even when Minnesota did lead at times, you felt like Penn State was gonna just pull through in the end, just find a couple ways to score on them or get a stop and hold them off. And sure enough, it was looking that way towards the end. Penn State was up by 2. Minnesota had the ball, and they were driving. They were up to about, they weren't quite at midfield. And then I believe we got a sack, forced them in a 4th and long situation somehow. It was like 4th and 15, 4th and 16. And so on that last play, their quarterback just launches this prayer of a pass towards the left sideline, kind of around the 20-yard, Penn State 20-yard line, kind of where, my dad and I were sitting. And I just remember it looked like it initially just kind of fell to the ground incomplete, but it turns out went off a Penn State player's hand, and there just happened to be a second Minnesota player right there to just dive under and catch it. And I just remember when I saw the referee doing this, to signal it was a made catch inbounds, I just remember being, flabbergasted as, wait, that was a catch? And all of a sudden, there's Minnesota right in field goal range, chance to, pull off the biggest upset of the year. And, sure enough, that's what happens. LeVar Arrington wasn't quite able to get high enough to block the kick. So that kind of, not only did that ruin Penn State's national title hopes, it seemed, a lot of people say that's the beginning of the dark years, which was the era of Penn State football from the 2000 to 2004, where they suffered 4 losing seasons in 5 years before they started to rise again in the mid to late 2000s. So I'd say that one. Last not least, 2004 Iowa game, which better known as the 6-4 game amongst Penn State and Iowa fans. I was a student at the time, and I just remember, there were so many opportunities for Penn State to just make an easy field goal. And Robbie Gould, who's a kicker at the time, who's now, most of you know, he's a very accomplished NFL kicker, but he was a middling college kicker at the time. And I just remember him, he missed about 5 or 6 easy field goals. And looking back, he just makes one of those, Penn State probably wins the game. And I think what really rubbed salt in the wound though was Kirk Ferentz opting late in the game to take another safety instead of giving Penn State the ball back. And I think they were deep in their own territory. Instead of giving punting to Penn State, give them a chance to try another easy field goal or maybe score a touchdown even, he just opts to take a safety and kick the ball, do a real kickoff in hopes they won't be able to drive down the field. And sure enough, it worked. So those are my worst losses. Now we'll get to the fun part for me, best wins. And I jotted quite a few down. I don't know if I'll go through all of them in great detail, but I guess starting with some more recent, the 2017 Michigan game, whiteouts. I list this one. As you know, 2017 didn't quite go the way I hoped, but this was, at the time, Penn State was undefeated. They were number 2. College Game Day came to State College for the first time in 8 years, I believe. And it was the first time they ever did a show on the Old Main Lawn, which is right on campus. Because in the past, they would just do it across the street from Beaver Stadium. But I always love it when they do shows right on campus. You see the grass, you see the main buildings in the background. Like, it looks like you're on a college campus. So that was really nice. And of course, they were seeking some revenge from the last few. I think Michigan had won 3 in a row at that point. And so, and I think just obliterating, Jim Harbaugh coached Michigan team under the lights on national TV with that real satisfying feel to it. So that it was just a great atmosphere all around. So that sticks out to me. I have 3 wins over Ohio State listed. So I'll start from 2005, which was my senior year at Penn State. And that was, we were coming out of the dark years at that time. They were undefeated. They had broken out a couple weeks before that with a win at Northwestern in the final minutes, and they had followed that up by crushing a ranked Minnesota team at home. And so this though was the game where Penn State could show they were either truly back on the national scene, or they were just, sort of back, as in, oh, they can get to a bowl game again. So I just remember, I think that was the first time I ever saw game day in person. They were there. That's actually when the whole tent city, Paternoville, now known as Nittanyville, started up. That was the week that it all began. So, and then that goes to, I remember, the game itself was a defensive struggle for the most part, and I think the most iconic moment from that game was, of course, Tom Bahali sacking Troy Smith in the final minute, forcing the fumble that Penn State recovered. And it was also the game where I think the Zombie Nation just became a mainstream part of Penn State football. I mean, it just every single big defensive stop, they would just blast it from the PA system. And what stuck out to me about that was it wasn't just the student section jumping up and down to it. It was also, I look around, I see the whole stadium, even the old people sections, or everyone's jumping. And I think some bleachers got broken up at the time too. So I remember there was concerns about structural damage from that. So they told them to stop, to cut down on the Zombie Nation after that. And the 2008 game at Ohio State, that sticks out to me because it was the first win in Columbus in 30 years. And of course, for me, it was the first time I ever witnessed in my lifetime Penn State winning in Columbus. So that was a good one. Then 2016, I was there for that one. Probably don't need to go into too much detail about how that game went, but I can just remember thinking, when they blocked the field goal and Grant Haley scooped it up, it seemed like Ohio State's kicker had a great angle on him to take him down at like the 20-yard line. And I really didn't think Haley was going to get in the end zone. I was excited, but I wasn't like ready to burst yet. But when I saw the kicker kind of miss his legs and then Haley just stumbling into the end zone, I couldn't believe it. So those three Ohio State wins stick out to me. Others that maybe people might not know or maybe forgot a little bit, the 94 Illinois game. If you look it up on YouTube, Penn State they got down to a 21-zip hole in the first quarter against an Illinois team that at the time had the top-rated defense in the country. And now Penn State had the top-rated offense in the country. They had, Kerry Collins, a quarterback, John Carter running the ball, Bobby Ingram and Kyle Brady catching passes. But they got in the 21-0 hole, but they just scratched and clawed their way back. And eventually in the final minute of the fourth quarter, they put together a legendary 96-yard drive, which finished with the fullback Brian Milne just pounding it into the end zone about a minute to play. And so they went on to win that game and secure a Rose Bowl spot and preserve the undefeated season. And 2002 Nebraska game, that was my freshman year as a student, and it was a night game. The night games were they were starting to become more of a thing then, I think, at Penn State. Growing up, I didn't really remember going to night games, but that was one of the first ones. And, there's a lot of pent up energy and I think frustration from 8 years prior, 94, when Penn State, despite finishing undefeated, were ranked number 2 in the AP and coaches polls, and Nebraska was number 1 as the only other undefeated team. And there's a lot of anger at Penn State's directed at Nebraska, probably wrongfully, because it's not Nebraska's fault that sports writers and coaches, voted them number 1. But there's just a lot of pent up. So the fans are definitely very loud and really taking it out on Nebraska, and they just annihilated them 40-7 on national TV. So that that's one that sticks out to me. Last Wisconsin in 2012 and 2013, those were the 2 years under Bill O'Brien when they were just starting to deal with the sanctions. So 2012 sticks out to me because that was they put up a pregame video honoring all the seniors the ones who stuck around, and they unveiled. Actually, in the state, I don't know if you ever noticed on TV, they sometimes show a shot of the skyboxes, and there's like you see these years listed, like 1994, like years of like undefeated seasons or national championships. So they ended up unveiling a 2012 banner on that skybox, which just to honor all the kids who stuck around after the sanctions got handed down to help keep the program from falling apart. So and they ended up upsetting Wisconsin in overtime. It was an emotional day. And then the following year, in 2013, they were a 24-point underdog going into Madison. And Wisconsin, they were playing for, I think they had a shot at a BCS bowl, a big time bowl game. And Penn State, you had freshman Christian Hackenberg at quarterback at that point. And I mean, they really had no business winning that game, but they just came out and lit them up. I think they jumped out to like a 17-point lead at one point, and Wisconsin did come back and had a chance to. I think they had a chance to tie it at the end with a touchdown, but I think they had their Hail Mary pass got intercepted. But I mean, that was amazing, and that was a heck of a way for Bill O'Brien to end his Penn State coaching career, because after that he took the Houston Texans job. But those are the wins that stick out to me the most.
Yeah, when you mentioned 2012 and 2013, that's just a special place in Penn State football history in regards to just the context of the wins and the losses. And I certainly thought at the time, based on the situation that unraveled and the innocence of the players and the coaches that were currently on the staff, it just being a very unfortunate situation that goes way beyond the football field. But I just thought, who's going to touch Penn State for a number of years in regards to top talent, and how are they going to recover from this? And this is going to be about a 10-year process of digging out of a hole of stigma. And for that regime under Bill O'Brien to immediately establish credibility again and start to compete at that level, completely turned around what could have been just a dark age for Penn State football, as it appeared it was going to be. I pretty much remember all the games you're referring to. I maybe the 2002 Nebraska game, I looked that up, a 40-7 win. And obviously you outlined why that was significant considering what happened in 1994, when I believe the two teams under that system should have shared the national championship. That's what was fair. Two outstanding programs playing in two outstanding conferences should have shared the national championship as undefeated teams. I'll just highlight the Ohio State series in particular, because obviously that has been pivotal for both programs. You mentioned the 2005 game, which was the whiteout, in which Ohio State just had a loaded team. And what's ironic is that both teams, Penn State and Ohio State, narrowly missed what was an appearance in the national championship game, which was one of the most famous games of all time, USC and Texas. But each of those teams were that close to getting there, because, of course, Penn State the very next week went to Michigan and lost with 1 second on the clock, their only loss of the season. For Ohio State, they actually played Texas that year in Columbus and pretty much owned the game and dropped a touchdown pass that would have given them a 10 or 12-point lead with just a few minutes left that would have iced the game. They dropped the pass. They missed the field goal. And Vince Young pulled out a win in the last 25 or 30 seconds. Otherwise, Ohio State has one loss, and there's a battle between Penn State and Ohio State, and you would think Penn State would have been given the nod with a head-to-head situation, but Ohio State and Penn State both that close to being the other team in that USC-Texas showdown that is one of the most historic games in college football history. Then, of course, you mentioned the 39-38 game in which Penn State dominated for about 3.5 quarters, something in that range. As you mentioned, 21-3, 28-10. JT Barrett played out of his mind in the last 6 or 8 minutes of that game. Also remember a stat from that game where Saquon Barkley had his way for much of the game, and you mentioned the injuries along the Penn State offensive line. Ohio State had one of the great defensive fronts in college football, and Saquon Barkley had something like his last 9 carries of that game rushed for like negative 18 yards. And it was just a complete swing in momentum, and Ohio State took it on from there. And one of the great games you're going to see, 39-38. And again, a huge swing in the Big Ten, because if Penn State wins that game, Ohio State had lost the week before. Penn State would have had the tiebreaker. And we don't know, had Penn State won that game, maybe they go to Michigan State and don't have a hangover. We certainly can't discount Michigan State winning the game head-to-head, but maybe Penn State wins that game. And even if they don't, with one loss, they go to the Big Ten championship game and possibly not just win the conference championship, but win to go into the playoffs. So a lot of pivotal games with Ohio State, obviously. And you mentioned the euphoria of 2016 and coming back from what we saw was a Penn State team that was getting better, starting to beat some good teams like Iowa and Minnesota. But of course, Ohio State was a giant, and to pull off that game after getting down like 12-0, 14-0, something in that range early in the game, and coming back to win that over Ohio State was obviously monumental to catapulting them to the Big Ten championship against a team that basically, under Urban Meyer, basically lost like 4 games in the Big Ten in 7 seasons. So that doesn't happen very often. So the Penn State-Ohio State series has been remarkable in and of itself. And then you mentioned the Michigan Penn State series obviously has been huge in the conference as well.